Welcome to the Infuse Compassion Podcast, hosted by me, Amy Quesenberry.
And me, Mark Carpenter.
We are on a mission to make this world a kinder place for us all by bringing healthier human connection to communities, families, and organizations of all types and sizes.
Our goal is to create stronger relationships, more inspired teams, increased trust, and improved results.
So let's get started with more ways to infuse compassion into our world. Welcome back, Compassionators, to another episode of the Infuse Compassion Podcast. Wow, we have a fascinating guest for you today. I'm so excited. You're going to love what she has to share with us. But I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime, Mark Carpenter, to do the introductions. Mark.
Oh, thank you. And I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to introduce to you Nancy Guntner. Nancy is a competitive triathlete. She's had 2 knee replacements. She's a preacher's kid. She's fun. She's passionate. She's going to bring her full Oklahoma to us as well. All of these things describe Nancy Guntner, who's the CEO of Guntner Training and specializes in generational consulting and positive intelligence team coaching. We're going to give Nancy a chance to talk about what those topics mean. Due to her love for adventure and activity, she has actually been to 5 different continents, and she's spoken on 3 of them. I want to hear about the speaking opportunity that she had in Antarctica. And I'm kidding. I'm suspecting that's one where she didn't speak to anybody. But Nancy also enjoys all types of sports, continues to participate in sprint, Olympic, and half Ironman triathlons. So she's going to bring all sorts of great energy to us and great insights about communicating across generations. Nancy Guntner, welcome to the Infuse Compassion Podcast.
Thank you. And I have not spoken on Antarctica. That I'm missing that one. I just need you to send me down there for some reason.
There's a goal. There are some penguins who could probably really use to hear from you, is what I'm thinking.
Absolutely. And they might be in generations too.
I'm sure there's multiple generations of penguins out there. So talk to me about this. How did you get into this work around communicating and coaching people about cross-generational communication? And how do you see that connecting into our world of compassion?
Wow. So that's a big question. And so how did I get into it? When I was in my probably late 30s, 40s, I was working for the YMCA and I was supervising a lot of what I would term as the kids, right? So I was supervising a lot of people that were younger than me. And I might have actually been maybe a little bit older, maybe mid 40s. But I was supervising these people that were younger than me and was struggling with them. And I happened to also be getting my master's at the time. And so I had to choose a project. I had to choose, my master's thesis. And so I decided, well, I want to learn more about all these people that I'm supervising. So I start studying, and my master's thesis is on at that time, the 4 generations that were in the workplace. So I did 2 years of extensive study. I read tons of books, lots of different authors on the generations, and just became really, really fascinated with it. And so, so again, 2 years of intensive study. And then since then, it's been about, 15 years or so. I have just continued studying each of the generations as they grow up and as they get into the workplace. And then as this youngest generation, Gen Z, as they started into their generational impacts, started learning about them as well. So I just get super fascinated about all the generations and them working together. And then, of course, I'm supervising all these groups as well. Well, working for the YMCA, I'm also not only supervising them, but I'm seeing them walk in the doors. All and today 5 generations walking in the door of the YMCA. And so I'm seeing all this stuff play out firsthand as an employee and as members that are walking in. So to answer the question, how did I get so interested in it? That is the reason right there. It was primarily I'm having to supervise them and I am not doing a very good job of it. And so learning about them. Now, how does this fit to compassion? When you ask me that question, or you mentioned that early on when you asked for me to come onto the podcast, and I thought, okay, where is the connection? And last week I was at Harvard University, and I'd already come up with where the connection was for me, but last week I was at Harvard University getting an executive coaching certification, and one of the things that we studied was not compassion specifically, but it was this really our ability to listen, and it goes pity, sympathy, empathy, compassion. That's sort of the process that they were explaining to us, and I thought, oh my goodness, there is 100% the connection on generations, and compassion has to do so much with how we listen to the person that we're talking to, whether they're from our generation or not. But if they're from a different generation, it is heavily about like what are they talking about, and what am I hearing? Because I'm hearing it from my understanding of life, which is based on how I grew up. They're explaining it from their understanding of life, which is how they grew up. So I was telling y'all a minute ago, but I was talking to this kid, and he is only 17, so I think I'm legit in calling him a kid. He is a coaching client. He's an elite athlete, and I am his mental coach. And so I was talking to him this morning after he had finished his workout to sort of figure out, how things are going. He's going to school as well, and so he's trying to, doing all this stuff, and he's getting a little overwhelmed with things. And yesterday we were having a long talk, and so today I was just checking in on him. How are you doing? And so he's telling me, and he's not fully in the spot where he wants to be yet. So I start telling him everything that he needs to know. But I'm telling him that as boomer. I am not telling him that as a Gen Z. I am actually, even though I do this work, I'm not thinking, what does he need to hear? I'm thinking, what do I need to say? And so I'm saying everything that I need to say. And he's like giving me this deadpan look of like, you're my parent right now. Yeah, I'm so not listening to you anymore. And so then, later I was like, oh, I so did not handle that correctly, because I should have listened. I should have just said, hey, how are things going? And then just listened and allowed him to be who he is and to struggle with the things he's struggling with, which are not what I'm struggling with. So anyway, so where does compassion fit? To answer this sort of the second part of that question, it is listening, like genuinely listening for what is important for the other person to hear, not what I want to say.
Yeah, I love that. And Nancy, that I'm passionate about listening too as a key leadership skill. I think that's one of the leadership skills that we need to really start treating people as people. From your perspective, why is that so hard for us? We know we should listen. We know that's important. We know that we should be listening to communicate to what they need. Why do we struggle with that?
Yeah. Gosh, that is a good question. And I think from a generational standpoint, it's because we don't know. So I'm a boomer, and I grew up during a period of time where, we had 3 channels on the TV. We did not have a smartphone. We did not have a computer, right? You had pen and paper. You learned cursive. You learned how to type on a typewriter. We had a manual typewriter at our house. The electric typewriter was at school. So I grew up during a time like that. And, when it comes to listening, I think I'm listening, but I am listening with ears that date back to how life was when I grew up. Not with, yeah. So I know I have a smartphone today. I work on a computer every day. We're on Zoom right now, but my brain developed whenever I was on a manual typewriter and 3 channels on the TV that went off at midnight. That's, my brain is developing during that time. So today I am listening with those kind of ears, not necessarily with the ears of somebody who grew up during a very different time period.
So with that in mind, how do we get past that? Because I'm with you. I grew up with those 3 channels on the TV that shut off at midnight. How do I get beyond that to communicate more effectively and listen more effectively to those that were raised in a different generation?
Yeah. So when you heard me speak, I have a chart that shows how communication actually happens, and whoever is sending the message out, they are encoding it. So like right now, I'm talking and I am encoding my message based on things that make sense to me, and then I'm going to choose a channel to send that message through. And so in this case, it's virtually. So I'm going to send that message virtually to the two of you. Then y'all are going to decode the message based on things that make sense to you. Now, I don't know for sure which generation. Mark, I think you and I are both baby boomers, but I'm not sure about Amy. I'm thinking that she might be, I was thinking that she might be a Gen X. So you're going to decode the message using things that make sense to you, like words and phrases and things that make sense to you. So when it comes to actually communicating a message through, you've got to actually think about the end user, not about where you are. Because if you encode the message with words, again, that make sense to me, then the decoding of it is like they're going to get the wrong message because they're going to decode it very differently. You can see it a lot actually with the traditionalist generation, the older generation. So my parents were part of that oldest generation, and I'm a cusper. I'm right at the very end of the baby boomers, so I can understand Gen X as well as the baby boomers. But my parents would do things, and even still today, I can think of some of the things that they would do and say, and I would hear it, and I'd be like, that makes no sense. And why in the world are we doing that? Like, such as washing sandwich bags. So you put a sandwich in a sandwich bag, right? And of course, when I was growing up, they were fold over, not Ziploc, right? So you fold them over. But then after you finish the sandwich, you bring that sandwich bag home and you wash it out, and then they're scattered around the kitchen where they dry out. And I think back to that, and even then I thought, this is so weird. Like, why are we doing this? And it's because, my parents' generation, that it made sense to them to do things that way or to say things a certain way. And they weren't even thinking about, how does this look to anybody else? Or what does Nancy think about this? What does my brother think about this? Like, they're not thinking like that. That is just not their,
it's perfectly logical to them.
Absolutely.
It makes complete sense. It's like my grandmother used to clean off tinfoil, and she had this big ball of tinfoil that she kept, and then she would reuse it for other things. So I completely relate to that.
Yeah.
So this is fascinating. Okay. I mean, really, this is so fascinating. Here's what I want to know. How can a younger generation help an older generation be a better leader to them? And you could flip that. But what I'm looking for, I'm going to an assumption, okay, in the organization that I work in, okay, I believe all of the leaders have direct reports that are younger than them. That's the point I'm making. Now, that's not always the case. In organizations, that's not always the case. Sometimes somebody who's in a younger generation is leading somebody from an older gen, okay? But here's the question on the table. How can an employee that has a manager that's a different generation from them help them understand what they need?
Yeah. So so let me go first to the younger generation that is supervising an older. Quite often that younger generation is actually intimidated by that older person that they might be supervising. Now, I won't say everybody's like that, but sometimes it is because they feel like that person has more experience or something like that. And so there might be a little bit of that. But so now let me flip that around to also say, for an employee to help a supervisor, it can be difficult because of the power dynamics that are there. One thing that I feel is so important is it's not about the older generations understanding the younger generations, and it's not about the younger generations. Well, you've got to understand where the older generations are coming from. It's not about one generation understanding another. It is about all of the generations understanding each other. Like every single generation, every single person has to make it important enough to understand the people that they work with, the generations that they work with, and individually the people that they work with, in order to have an impact on them. Like you've got to understand where they're coming from. Related to your question about how do the younger, or how does an employee help a manager maybe adapt better or to listen better, I would say is first you have to listen to them. So especially if there's a little bit of power dynamics there, the employee needs to listen to the manager first. They need to feel like they are being heard. Likewise, the manager needs to help the employee feel like they are being heard. Like if we don't feel like we're being heard, it's very difficult for us to listen to anybody else. Because I just want to drive my point home. Until somebody listens to me, I'm going to keep driving my point home. So if both people are driving their points home, then there's no listening, and there's no, like, they're just going to be like in conflict with each other, driving each point, but not really listening to either one of them. So somebody's got to start the process of, let me just listen. Let me hear what you have to say. Why is that important to you? What is it about that is important? And once I can understand why that's important to you, now I have an opportunity to figure out, okay, what is it that is important to me, and how do these two things match? That almost, I would say, most of the time, there is a match there. We just see it from two different angles. And if we don't ever find out what's most important, quite often we can't get to where there's actually a connection, where there's a match.
Yeah, it's that when I hear you talk, I'm hearing you talk about how are you getting curious about the person sitting across from you, right? How are you getting curious? And I really think it was so powerful in your opening story. There was a shift. There was a moment with the person that you're coaching where you reflected. You stepped back and said, oh, you know what? There's something I could have done differently, maybe a little bit better. So here's my question to you. How do you make that right? How do you, because there are managers all over that are listening to this, and maybe some of them are going, you know what, I've had some missteps. So how do you make that right?
Yeah. I do another program, or I work with a company called Positive Intelligence, and it's a lot of neuroscience. So I've studied neuroscience, just sort of like two parallel studies that I've had one throughout my life. One is the generations, because I'm so fascinated with them. And the second is neuroscience. Again, same reason. I'm fascinated with both. And there is a connection, most definitely, between both. But one of the things related to the neuroscience is quite often we are driven by guilt or blame or shame or negative emotions. Quite often we're driven by those, which usually are based in some kind of fear. But where we want to be is, most of that is left brain. Where we want to be is on the right side of the brain, which is what you just said about being curious, having empathy with people, listening to people, being creative in finding solutions that seem to work for everybody. All of those things are on the right side of the brain. And that particular area, we've got to be sort of in the right mindset to be able to be there. If we're afraid, so let's go back to the scenario that you described earlier, where you've got an employee and a manager, and how do they communicate better? How do they hear each other, listen to each other a little bit better? If there is any kind of fear on either one of their parts, it's very difficult for them in that moment to effectively listen. And it's because that fear is driving what they're thinking and what they're doing, instead of reflecting what you just said, instead of reflecting to say, all right, let me step back here. Let me take a breath and realize really all I have to do right now is just listen and genuinely pay attention to what that person's saying. And if I can do that, now you take a breath, you're on the right side of your brain, you got a lot better chance to end up exactly where you just said, which is being curious, having empathy, being creative, being forgiving, having patience, being loving. All of those things sit in that part of the brain.
I'd love to get just a couple of tips on how to get there as you coach people around that. How do you get them out of that fear brain? Because I'll tell you, that sucks you in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you talked about, take a pause, breathe. Well, what other tips can you give us to help us get out of that fear mode and into that curiosity mode?
Yeah, so it takes intentional effort on the part of the person. There's intentionality to it. It's not something that you just do unless you have practiced it. And it's sort of like sports. You think about any sport that you want to play, you practice. And if you've ever heard a coach in your ear, they'll say, you're going to play like you practice, right? So you need to practice in order to get better. Well, mental fitness, like your brain, mental fitness is the same way, that you need to practice things intentionally in order to, in the moment, in the game, be able to do that particular skill. So, I would say there's a program called Positive Intelligence. I offer that program to my clients. It's an 8-week program, but uh, the purpose behind it really is, you have a small group, five to 8 people that are all going through it together, that support each other. So support is one from somebody around you. So it's very difficult to be successful all by yourself. You can see it in physical fitness. You go to the gym, if nobody's there to meet you, then, the next day you might say, I'm just going to sleep in. So if there's a group of people around you, so support is one. Second one is intentionality. You've got to be intentional in what you're choosing to do. And then I can give you all kinds of tips on how to do this pause and choose thing. But one of the biggest things is when you're pausing to take a breath, any of your senses will bring you to the present moment. And if you can come to the present moment, you have the ability to shift your thinking. So the coming to the present moment allows you to stop all the negative thoughts that you're having. And you can see this. I'm going to bring this back to the generations, actually. You can see this a lot with Gen Z. Gen Z, that's the kid that I was talking to this morning, 17-year-old. He is a Gen Z athlete. And his level of anxiety is pretty high, as is the case with many of Gen Z. Their level of anxiety is really high. If they can learn tips, tricks, things that will allow them to come to the present moment at any, like whenever they feel their stress level or their overwhelmed level, like the guy that I was talking to today, he's feeling overwhelmed between school, getting ready for college, his triathlons that are coming up, all of his training, all of that. He just feels overwhelmed with it. If he is able to take a breath, step back, realize the thoughts that he is having right now, and then come to the present moment and choose a different thought, now he's got a chance to overcome, at least to calm down his anxiety just a little bit. Gen Z sees more of this than the other 4 generations. The other 4, all the rest of us, we deal with stress. Like we deal with stress all the time. Gen Z deals with that too, but partially because of the smartphone, partially because of COVID, partially because of just the state of the U.S. right now. All of that impacts Gen Z specifically, and it impacts their brain because their brain is developing while all of this is occurring. So there's this connection between the neuroscience and the generations, and you see it really all come together with Gen Z. There's a lot of connection there. Sorry, I'm just trying to tie everything together. I just love talking about this stuff.
And I'm kind of geeking out on the science here a little bit.
Yeah, but can we, I apologize if I missed it, but can we have a clear definition for our listeners and for myself on what positive intelligence is?
Yeah, so in short, it is your ability to deal with life situations from a positive rather than negative perspective. But positive is not just being upbeat and positive all the time. Positive is being resilient from a standpoint of less stress, being able to deal with stress more effectively, being able to deal with frustration, anxiety, all of that, being able to deal with those things more effectively, that is positive mindset. Not being able to deal with them or allowing them to spiral you downward, that is a negative mindset.
Oh, wow. I actually I'll save it for the after podcast because my brain just exploded with a lot of stuff. But this is your platform. Thank you for explaining that. That was perfect.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And this is one we could go on and on and on, but we're kind of reaching the end of our regular time that we try to keep within. And so I thank you, Nancy, for everything that you've shared, all these little moments, all these little tidbits that have come out of it. You've probably seen me over here taking copious notes off to the side. We like to end by asking one last question, one final question of you. We refer to our listeners as compassionators. They have opted into compassion. So based on your work, what is one tip that you can give to our compassionators that they can use to infuse compassion into their worlds in this coming week?
I would say it goes back to sort of what we talked about at the beginning, which is listening. You say that word listen and you're like, oh yeah, I do that. But quite often we don't, just like you said, Mark, quite often we don't. So, I would almost say listen between the lines, pay attention to what you're actually seeing, not just hearing. I'm reading a book called Social Intelligence, which is an older book. I've read it before, but one of the things it really talks about is this idea of recognizing what is happening around you, not just the words that are being said, but what is not being said. What's happening that you're not, they're not verbally saying. So really paying attention to that and acting on that. Listen carefully for what they are saying, not what you want them to say.
Fantastic. And Nancy, where can people get more Nancy Guntner in their life?
Yeah, I would love that. So my website is guntertraining.com. It's GUNTER training.com. And then if you want to reach me, it's Nancy@guntertraining.com.
Fantastic. And we'll have those links in the show notes for us too. Amy, any final words you want to say as we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you. I mean, it is really, we as human beings are so dynamic and we're so fascinating. And your story of how you found yourself as a supervisor who was struggling to be the best you could be as a supervisor. And you said, you know what can I do better? And that's so much of the mission that Mark and I are on. So you are literally you are the goal right here, the way you represent yourself. And I want to thank you for doing what you do and how you do it. And thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, everybody, don't forget to infuse compassion into your life. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye now.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share a review and like the podcast so other compassionators can join us. Until next time, let's all do something each day to infuse compassion into the world. For more information on our guests, see the show notes. For more information on Mark and Amy, go to infusecompassion.com.